Okay. Just a heads up. Hey everybody, it's really great to see so many people turn up today. My name is James Daly, for those of you who don't know me. I usually organize these meetups. I see some old faces and I see some new faces, and that makes me really, really happy. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Mize. He's the founder of this company called Fiberplane. And they're our lovely, lovely hosts for the evening. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Great turnout. A lot of Rust crab friends. Love it. Just a few things on Fiberplane. So my name is Mies. I'm the founder and CEO. Welcome to this amazing building that we have. So we are building collaborative notebooks for DevOps and SREs. Effectively, we connect to your observability stack, help visualize that, and infrastructure debugging, figure out what's going on. Big fans of Rust, so our API is in Rust. We use sort of a provider model that I think people later will talk about a bit more. All in WebAssembly. We are hiring, usual. We're hiring chat. Find out more on fiberplane.dev and enjoy the meetup.
Hello, everybody.
All right, who knows a good joke?
Oh, perfect.
There we go.
All right.
Is this working? Yes.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks everybody for coming. My name's Evan. I'm a Rust developer at Fiberplane.
My name is Benno. I've been here at Fiberplane since its inception.
And in this talk, we're going to talk about our experience using the Axum web framework. So we were using another framework and then switched to using Axum. In this talk, we'll talk a little bit about what Axum is like, what it was like to switch, and then things we like and don't like. So kind of a overview of our experience using it and some things you might want to think about when picking a Rust web framework.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we set out to create Fiberplane, but yeah, of course, first question is what language are you going to use? Obviously, it's going to be Rust because it's a Rust meetup. So yeah, what are the reasons for picking Rust? Yeah, it's safety, type safe, all that stuff. It's speed, it's fast. We already knew we wanted to do something with WASM, so we were already prepared for that as well, but I don't know. It's just a cool technology, so we just liked using it. So yeah, then came the next question, are we going to go async or not? Obviously, we want to go async, and at the time, Tokyo seemed to be like the most popular framework out there, so we decided early on, like, hey, we're going to use Tokyo, a lot of third-party Crates already had support for it, and sorry, camera shine. Go ahead.
No pictures.
Good side.
Just kidding.
All right, what was it? Oh yeah, async. So yeah, but then after that came the question like, which web framework are you going to use? So we went through a couple. Like one of the highlight or low light, whatever way you want to say it, was Warp. We tried it out for a bit, but yeah, it's built on Tokyo and Hyper, so that's good. It has support for WebSockets, which is something as a collaborative tool, it's very useful to have. But unfortunately, it's quite difficult to understand, in my opinion. And if something were to go wrong, you're in a world of hurt. I think you.
Yeah, I used it at a previous company, and Warp uses this filter model where you filter the requests through this chain of nested filters, and you get some very weird errors. Like if a request doesn't match something, it ends up in just a different place. And so when you would expect to get like a 404 error, you might get a 405 method not allowed. And you're just like, what? Why? And it's because it ended up somewhere else in your logic. So I was not keen to use that one again.
But we ended up with Routerify, which is this simple router just built on top of, again, Tokyo and Hyper. Was pretty decent. Like defining your routes and everything is very easy to do. But we did find out that there wasn't like a lot of traction. Not a lot of people were using it. So we found that, no, sorry.
Yeah, so this is not the most widely used framework, but it's nice and simple. It's easy to create routes. It doesn't give you the kind of errors that I was just describing. So like, wasn't the most widely used project, but like a fine choice. So that was the initial way that our API was coded. And as a result, we had a kind of layered model. So with Routerify, it gives you a bunch of utilities for parsing the details out of the HTTP request, but you have to do a fair amount manually. And so what we ended up with was a 3-layered model where we had the API layer, which was all the Routerify specific stuff, where we're parsing the details of the HTTP request. The service layer is all the business logic, has our actual structs that we care about and methods and things like that. And then the database layer, for obvious reasons. And the API layer looked a bit like this, where you have a lot of just parsing logic, where all it's doing is like taking stuff out of the headers, taking stuff out of the path, taking stuff out of the request body, calling the service layer, and then serializing it back to JSON. And so this is what the like create notebook handler looked like, and it's a lot of manual deserialization. And this is what the update notebook handler looked like. And as you can see, it's almost entirely the same with the word create replaced with update. And like we just had that for absolutely everything. And so as a result, this 3-layer thing was a real pain to work with, because anytime we needed to add a new feature, we had to add it in 3 different places in 3 different, slightly different ways. And it really felt like the API layer was not serving us very well, because it just was this manual serialization, deserialization stuff. So features became tedious. So at some point, Axum was announced, and we were like, oh, sweet, let's, new framework, let's check it out. Always got to be wary of new frameworks, but like worth looking into. So it was released July of last year, and had some exciting things going for it. So some of the things that were similar to the other ones we mentioned, it's built on Tokyo and Hyper. Hyper is the HTTP library that a lot of things are built on. It has WebSocket support. It's easy to write route handlers. We'll show you what that looks like. And it's developed by the Tokyo team. So one of the Warp maintainers is also on the Tokyo team. But I think he developed Warp and then was like, maybe this is not the best solution for this. But Axum seems like it's got a lot more emphasis behind it from that team. And so it feels like more of a part of the Tokyo stack. So we were excited about it. We figured, let's give this a try. So every month we have a hack day on Friday where everybody can hack on whatever they want and show it off at the end of the day. And so switching to Axum started as a hack day project where the two of us were like, let's just see if we can do it in a day. Took a little bit more than a day. Porting the actual API service took about 2 days for 20,000 or so lines of code. And then porting the tests took another 4 days to get that working. But the experience was quite good. So right now we'll go through how Axum works and show you a little bit of what it looks like to use it. So one of the main things that Axum has, which some other frameworks have as well, but it's got this extractor pattern. And so what that means is it has these tuple structs, which I'll show you an example of in a second, that wrap your data structure that you actually care about. And those things take care of the serialization, deserialization for you. Yeah, I'll skip over that point. And so then, yeah, the deserialization is triggered by the web framework. So this is an extractor. So here we have our notebook create thing, and this is sort of skipping that whole API layer that we had before, because what we're actually using here is the core data structures that we have in our service layer. And all we have to do is we have our handler function, our notebook create function, and we wrap the parameters to this function in a path extractor or a JSON extractor for the body. There's other ones for headers and things like that. And so the function that I'm actually writing is a pretty simple function that takes Rust structs, not an HTTP request, notably. And then I don't have to think about the serialization and deserialization. And the web framework, when it calls this handler function, it will call the respective methods to parse the details out of the request and so forth, which is really, really nice. It's like, there's a lot of cleverness baked into this, and so trying to express how cool I think it is with this extractor thing, where what it's showing you is just, you have these tuple structs that wrap your thing, and this is just destructuring those in your function. So yeah, that's the extractor model.
Yeah, and other way around, it's sort of the same, but then you have to implement this into response trait, where you can basically just return anything from your function, which if it implements this into response trait, it will take care of, turning into a response. But this also has, this is the, wrong button. So this is what it looks like. It's just you're returning a JSON object and then wrapping it like that. So super straightforward. But it also means that unit testing is super trivial, because instead of having to call your function and having to do your deserialization based on what is being returned, you can just do this directly on a struct itself. So here you can see that this notebook create is returning a JSON object again, or sorry, tuple, and it's but we're extracting that notebook from it, and that is just whatever you put in there, whatever struct you put in there. So you can just do an assert on notebook title equals whatever, and you don't have to do anything with deserialization within your tests. But obviously, you want to use the question mark operator, stuff like that. So we have what you would commonly probably use is wrapping it in this JSON result, which is returning another API error, which also implements this into response. So if an error were to occur, the database returns, object not found, you can translate it into a 404, for example, by just implementing that into response for that API error. So this is a little bit of how Axum works. We'll have questions afterwards if anybody has questions about that. But we'll also go through some things that we don't love about Axum. So first one. Yeah, so this is one that we came across while moving or refactoring. So we had a URL which had multiple path parameters in there. So we figured just define 2 path parameters, one being ID, one being secret. All right, then we created a unit test which filled in those parameters everything was passing, so everything's like fine. But when we found out, when we actually ran it on production, we got like some weird errors. Turns out that these path parameters, they don't work if there's multiple of them, so you need to have them as a tuple like this. So these are the things that that the framework does, or rather, the framework errors out on you, but your unit tests are passing fine. But so integration tests are still important to have, where you just spin up your entire server, make all your requests, and see if everything's working.
Yeah. Another thing that sort of a love-hate relationship with, I guess, is the way that Axum handles shared state is with this idea of an extension. And so an extension is the way you pass it to one of your handler functions is similar to those extractors that are extracting the details from the HTTP request. It's extracting the shared state that you have from the sort of the HTTP request. And that's sort of fine in the handlers. What's not amazing, and what we've come to expect from Rust, is things being, if something's required, it should be required at compile time, not at runtime. With this extension, if you code it incorrectly and don't pass your database to your router, you just get runtime errors. And so you'll get HTTP errors that say like internal server error, instead of it giving you a compiler warning, which is not great, because the only way that that would happen is just some really bad coding bug. So it would be nice if that was expressed through the type system. I understand why they didn't do that, because then you'd have a ton of generics everywhere, but this is something that's, don't love.
Yeah, this is something which might change in the future, like it's early days obviously, but like some sort of like OpenAPI integration, like we use OpenAPI to define our routes and our models and everything, so that if somebody wanted to use Ruby or whatever, that would be possible, or call us, but we are not going to write a client that's using Ruby, because I don't think anybody here knows Ruby. But yeah, some kind of...
You're hired.
So some type of integration where you either like extract it based on your routes and all of everything that you've defined, or the other way around, where you generate something. Maybe it is something that we'll create in a hack day. I think it's coming up Friday, so.
Preview into Benno's hack day, all right. So here's also a couple of Axum features that we're not using or not using yet. So first one is Tower middleware.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so Tower middleware, so Axum is built on top of Tower, which is yet another layer, but there's already a lot of middleware created for Tower, such as compression, rate limiting, all of these other things that you see listed here. And that's very useful to take advantage of. At the moment, we haven't delved into it too deeply, but I definitely think there's some things that can definitely be useful there.
Another thing is the debug handler macro. So there's kind of a nice, a lot of times in Rust or Rust web frameworks, when you deal with traits, what you end up running into while developing is you'll get some kind of horrible compiler error that's like, this function doesn't implement this trait. And you go, or this struct doesn't implement this trait. And you're like, why not? I don't like... and it doesn't tell you why. It just says, oh, it doesn't implement this, so it doesn't work. And you get these like really not nice errors. So they have it. Axum has a debug handler macro, which you can decorate your handler functions with, and then it'll give you this nice error that tells you exactly what's wrong with it. So haven't used that yet, but seems kind of neat.
Actually, we should move that, because I used it yesterday, and turns out that it's super useful, because the error that you get back is super non-descriptive, and then just adding that one, it was like, this type does not implement the serialization. So
all right,
perfect.
Never mind.
Yeah.
We are using it.
Only problem is that you need to get like a crate for it, which is a bit annoying, but otherwise perfect. Resources is another thing which is in there, which is pretty useful for forcing, I guess, like your patterns, like an index needs to be like the slash, and then, but we also organize everything by modules. So this way, it's like very easy to separate everything out. But we are still defining all the routes in like one single big file. So this makes it very easy to get all of that logic to that single module. Could be pretty useful.
Yeah. So in conclusion, Axum is still a pretty new web framework. There's some rough edges for sure, but it's really promising, and we had a good experience switching to it. We've enjoyed building features on top of it since then, so would recommend a look. And for us, it's really nice that it's part of the Tokyo stack, because that just means it'll likely be quite well maintained and also see quite a bit of adoption, because there's a lot of people using all the different parts of the Tokyo stack, and this just fits into it super nicely. So it's also worth mentioning, like if you're looking at different Rust web frameworks, you should definitely do your homework and look at some of the other examples, like Actix Web looks pretty interesting. It's quite widely used. It tops the synthetic benchmark charts, which, you know, large ongoing debate about how useful those are, but take that as you will. And then Poem has kind of an interesting take, and they've also got the OpenAPI integration as well, which would be nice, but it was a little bit too early when we were looking at it to really seriously consider. So to end, I will just say that we are really, really big fans of the Tokyo stack. We kind of couldn't do what we're doing without it. And I just want to give a little bit of love to the Tokyo team just for like the really awesome way that they've gone about building up the layers from scratch. And so they just have so many useful layers of functionality, ranging from like bytes to tracing, which is a like distributed logging framework that's really nice to use, Mio, Tower, Tokyo, the whole async stack, and then this framework builds on top of that really nicely. So just love the way that they build all of these layers that integrate with one another quite nicely, but are also really useful independent of the other ones on top of it. So lots of love to the Tokyo team. And yeah, thanks everybody for listening, and hope you have questions. So any questions?
Thank you guys so much. Oh, really interesting.
Oh, Mike, 1 sec.
Great. So yeah, thanks guys for the talk. Really interesting stuff. I was wondering a little bit about why not choose Actix. So a lot of the advantages that you mentioned, similar like the serialization part, were also present in Actix. And I heard you mention basically Hyper as one of the key considerations for not choosing it. I assume so. But I was wondering, what were your basically considerations regarding that?
Good question. So, like, I think Actix, I totally understand why Actix Web is quite widely used. It's got a lot of features to it. I think in this round we didn't look at it super deeply, to be frank. One of the things that turned me off from it earlier iterations when I had looked was the Actix framework, which is quite an opinionated way of building software. And like, if you want the actor model, like, go have the actor model. And if you don't want the actor model, like, I don't know. It's not my preferred style of programming. I know that Actix Web like uses it and sort of doesn't use it and has changed its mind over the years, but that was one of the reasons.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a quite quick question. The way the framework works reminds me a bit of, I'll say it, Java Spring. So it's, okay, if you were to talk to a normal architect manager, how would you sell a Rust-based framework versus the default staple of Spring? And actually, or would you actually leverage the fact that, hey, it's basically like Spring, so it's not that big of a mental leap. So, and so what are the other like super advantages that make it absolutely a default choice to not go with Spring? Which I would really love to have these in my pocket.
Well, there's less XML, I guess. That's gone. Okay, I haven't caught up with it. No, yeah, it's. I want to say like it's a bit lower level. It's not very define all your things in. Well, I assumed the XML, but that's I guess changed. And yeah, we have.
I'm definitely not the right person to speak to like the Java stack or Spring, but like I think the first choice is more about like programming language than about web framework, and like I think there are a bunch of reasons to choose Rust for new projects, and I would probably not want to be behind trying to rewrite a big Java service in Rust, but just because it's, rewriting anything is really complicated and you sort of miss out on all of the nuance that you built up over the years. So like, I would be wary of a big rewrite. Writing in Rust is has been a really nice experience. It's got strong type system. It's also quite low level. So I think the things I'd reach for it for first are, if you were like purely building a web service, that's like a team choice, what's everybody most comfortable in kind of question. I think some of the areas where Rust really shines so far, building command line tools, Rust has a really, really nice command line tool library called Clap. That's a great thing. Anything related to WebAssembly, Rust is really like the choice of language for WebAssembly stuff. And then a lot of lower level things where you really need the performance and Java doesn't cut it, then Rust is a great choice for that. Beyond that, I think you're kind of in like, what do people love using? What do people prefer? And I think there are a bunch of reasons why Rust has topped the developer, the developer happiness survey for a lot of years. Like, I think there are good reasons for that. It's also frankly pretty hyped, so there's some of that too.
I have a question about this extractor structs. Do you have ability to customize them if you have some unusual way of serializing, deserializing and stuff?
Yeah. So
how to test it?
Oops. How to test? So the question.
Serializers, deserializers.
Yeah.
How to test?
So you can. Do you want to answer that or should I?
Yeah.
Oops. I guess you just see my background for now. How do you test that? So with the extractor pattern, the way it works is that anything that implements from request can be as a parameter in one of your handler functions. And so there are a bunch of built-in extractors, like the JSON one that we showed or the path one. Those just implement it from very specific types. But you can also just implement your own thing that implements from request. And so if you wanted to parse XML or like any other kind of input things, you could implement that trait on a custom struct and then it would work just fine. And then you would just want to write your test framework to handle that. But
by default, it just derives the implementation of this trait.
Sort of. The way that those extractors work is it's a tuple struct that just is a simple wrapper around anything. It's generic over anything that implements Serday's deserialize trait. So anything that implements deserialize, which you can derive that for, you can wrap in and say, this is going to be put in as JSON. And then it just works out of the box. If you wanted a different thing, yeah.
Okay, clear.
Yes. Behind you.
Yeah.
Or next.
Sorry. This is a small question in between. Where can I get a Ferris sticker like that?
I think we have some of them there.
Okay, awesome.
Hey, what's the HTTP2 tree support like in the framework, or does it exist?
I don't actually know. So the question was, what's the HTTP 3 support?
Or even 2?
So 2 definitely supported, because the way that this stack works is Hyper is the one that actually implements those protocols, and so there is support for HTTP 1 and 2 in that. I would guess that they're working on it or have worked on it, but I actually am not sure. But it's a good question. The thing I like about just to speak to like the thing I like about Tokyo's layering in this sense is that Axum doesn't actually have to support HTTP 3 by itself because it's built on Hyper, which is used by a lot of different web frameworks. And so that's where actually the HTTP implementations would live. And I think there's something very nice about that because that HTTP implementation can be shared across a lot of different higher level frameworks. And then they just take advantage of that instead of having to roll it themselves. But yeah, I would be so willing to bet that if HTTP3 support isn't already implemented, there's like a big issue with a lot of people focusing on it, or someone's got like a draft PR for it. But don't know. Good question.
Yeah, so I had one simple question, actually 3 smaller questions and 1 bigger question.
Oh, wow.
The bigger question, I hope you can answer it. So you showed a bit about a debug handle derive macro. Do you have any idea how it works? How make those errors nicer? Because it's obviously a macro, but what code does it generate to?
Yeah, I've not looked into it, but it's definitely like an interesting one. But I would assume like that they don't do this by default because it definitely adds some like overhead or something. Yeah. But I'm guessing just like a lot of stuff around it to make sure that that it's just like trying to see if every like parameter that goes in or goes out, has like a certain trait.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but I hope you'll give a talk on it at a future future Rust meetup.
Or the short answer, magic.
Yeah.
I will try. The other question, so you're using WebSockets. How do you handle deserialization and serialization in WebSockets? Do you send bin code encoded packets over there? Does the framework handle this for you?
So yeah, the framework's pretty like loose, like Axiom that is. It basically delegates this to another crate called Tungstenite, I think it's called.
Tungstenite. Yeah.
Tungstenite, yeah. So basically you just get like these events like the text, binary, and all the other things like the ping pong, and you can just respond to them as you want. We're using JSON ourselves, so everything is like an enum, and it just gets serialized or deserialized based on that enum. So it's pretty trivial like that, but the Axiom is pretty hands-off in that. It's just a very simple one line that just kicks off a loop, and then you just are on your own, basically.
And the final question, so you
Is this the
didn't
big
talk
one?
about performance, I think. No, the big one was the first one, because that was what I really wanted to know.
Sorry.
So what's performance like with Axiom compared to Actix Web, for example, which is a harder question?
Universal. No, I don't think we've done any like benchmarking or anything like that.
I mean, anything that you know of, just a ballpark estimate.
I don't know.
They on the project page, it says it doesn't have benchmarks yet as comparing that. It is a relatively thin layer on top of Hyper, and there are benchmarks for Hyper, so I think that's like a more, like you can kind of treat it as just a thin layer on top. That's like, it's Hyper plus a bit of serialization, deserialization, and not much more.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. We're probably more database bound anyway, so yeah.
Or network bound, yeah. I'm just going to be a real quick advertisement for the M1 Mac. It's amazing. Sorry. I'm such a fan because that was like one of my big gripes with Rust generally, or like big Rust projects for a while. I have not had any of that problem. It's like, small number of seconds to build the project. So like, no issue.
But compared to what we used to have, I think that's negligible. There's no change.
Evan's giving a talk at WWC.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last questions? We'll also be milling about if anybody wants to come chat with us more. But yeah, thanks for listening, and thanks for the good questions.
Thank you. Still 15 more minutes. Thanks.
I did not. No. I really don't know why they picked the name, but.
Maybe like Tokyo, another town, let's take some. Okay, it's pretty well known town, so maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
You're giving good ideas. It took you 2 days. Kind of wondering how long it will take tonight to rewrite that project next.
What do you? How big is it, or what are you working on?
There's 2 endpoints. The only challenge is that serialization is based on a header, like based on a header field. Yeah. The payload needs to be serialized in different structures.
That's actually well. Could you have a wrapper one that like so you have one header that's
Zero control over the request that I'm getting. Then in the webhook it has the event type in the header, and then it has essentially like a JSON walk that has a very similar JSON with different event types. But to get into like the specifics, you need to look at the header to how to see it.
it's not the greatest so
Step off the train, I'm walking down your street again, and past your door, but you don't live there anymore. It's years since you've been there, and now you've disappeared somewhere, like outer space. You found some better place, and I miss you. Like the deserts miss the rain, and I miss you. Oh. Like the deserts miss the rain, and I miss you. And I miss you. Like the deserts miss the rain, and I miss you. Miss the rain, and I miss you, and I miss you. Like the deserts miss the rain, and I miss you. Like the deserts miss the rain. Could you be dead? You always were 2 steps ahead of everyone. We'd walk behind while you would run.
You keep coming at midnight. When I'm deep in a dream, I can touch you. Something don't feel right. It's your voice that I miss when I call and you're not there. When I stand at your door and you won't let me in. Ain't no need to be an enemy. I always keep my promise. There's no need to separate from me and still keep throwing punches. And I've been thinking a lot about you lately. Please don't be an enemy. Can we just be honest? You were always so into me. Let's not end up enemies. I've been thinking a lot about you lately. I keep waiting for midnight. In the moment I'm anxious to face it. Something don't feel right. I'm so tired in my chest and I'm losing my breath. I'm so tired in my chest and I'm losing my breath. It's your voice that I miss when I call and you're not there. Ain't no need to be an enemy. I always keep my promise. There's no need to separate from me and still keep throwing punches. And I've been thinking a lot about you lately. Please don't be an enemy. Can we just be honest? You were always so into me. Let's not end up enemies. I've been thinking a lot about you lately. Stare at the window. I could not sleep. And if you draw this, yeah, it was bittersweet. And I was lost in space, lonely without you. If you could hear me, I wait for you there. The places that I go when I'm feeling that I'm low. Oh, places that I long. It's when I'm on my own. I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know why to feel this way. I don't know why I feel this way. I will. I don't know why I feel this way. I don't know why to feel this way. I don't know why I feel this way. I There's too much love here, too much in this house. And when the fall comes, why do I feel this way? And I was lost in space, lonely with
this way. And I don't know why to feel this way. And I don't know why I feel this way. Oh well. And I don't know why I feel this way. And I don't know why to feel this way. And I don't know why I feel this way. Oh well.
Oh, yeah.
Geen stream of zo.
Well, hello and good evening. My name is Tad Lispy, and I am a nerd, and I came here to talk to you about nerdy things. So recently I've been thinking a lot about how software is developed. And it seems to me that it's best developed in a collaborative way, when a lot of people collaborate together. And before we begin, I would like to get a little bit of a feeling of my audience. So maybe we can do a little bit of show of hands. I would like to know how many of you are, closer? Okay. How many of you are software developers? Oh, geez, everyone. Okay, and keep it up, and how many of you want to be a software developer? You have two, if you have two hands, you can raise them. Okay, you're living the dream. That's awesome. I see that vast majority, which is great, because that's who my talk is addressed to. Okay, and just to see, is there any like a designer or a product manager? Oh yeah, okay, great, great. Any entrepreneurs or startup founders? Oh yes, great, congratulations. You're in a world of pain. And any teachers or coaches or anyone? One, great, okay. Yeah, of course, counts, totally counts. Is there anyone who didn't raise their hand yet and would like to introduce themselves? Okay, okay. Great, let's move on. So we have a little bit of diverse audience, but mostly software developers. Yeah, so today I would like to talk to you about choices and combinations, which is a kind of tool for thinking. I'm going to show you some Rust code. Well, they made me, but the code is just for illustration. It's like very simplistic. I'm just beginning to learn Rust, so I'm not going to impress you with anything. And once again, it's like just for illustration, right? The talk is about thinking framework, maybe a little bit of design framework, but well, we'll see how it goes. So let's go back to the idea of collaboration. So it's software development involves a lot of different like roles, kinds of people, right? There are users, and I believe we should always start and end with users. And there are designers, managers, various other roles. And of course, there are software developers. And in this context, I believe software developers are like translators. Our role is to translate the knowledge about business or system or whatever into working useful software. And if we stay in this metaphor, a good translator needs to be knowledgeable about what they are doing, right, about their domain. They need to be sort of an expert. And I believe the same applies to software developer. So software developers need to understand what and why and how they are doing. And at my company, Software Garden, we put a lot of work into making developers into domain experts in their field. So
I use this term business domain, so maybe it's good if I explain a little bit what I mean by that. So many of you maybe have something like that in mind, like some enterprisey, little bit ridiculous setting. But what I really mean by this is like a pretty broad definition. So for me, business is any group of people that do something in an organized way. And it doesn't have to be commercial, doesn't have to be formal, doesn't have to be for profit. For example, of course it can be a company that has products or services, but it can also be like a government agency or a non-profit, or it can be a free software project done by like in open fashion, right? So anytime people come together to do some work, for this duration of this talk, let's call it a business, right? And group of people to collaborate, they need to understand each other, and they need to know what they are doing, how they are doing it, and why they are doing it, right? And this knowledge, this is what I will call business domain, right? Knowledge about how, what, and most maybe importantly, why we are doing what we are doing. And I think it's best if this knowledge is transparent and shared among as many people as possible, and not only people who are involved in a business, but also people affected by the business, right? Everyone should at least have opportunity to understand what's going on and why. And in a healthy organization, I think this knowledge also constantly evolves. And well, at Fiberplane, they probably know it because they are building new products, so they constantly discover new things about it. I don't know for sure, but I think it's a pretty safe bet. So I think this knowledge should evolve in a meaningful and empowering debate. And that means that there's a shared responsibility in an organization to enable this kind of debate, but also personal responsibility of everyone involved to understand what's going on and to be able to express their thoughts about it. So to enable this, today I want to talk about choices and combinations. This is just one of many tools that we can use to understand and to communicate about business domain. This one I believe is like really powerful. It's applicable to a variety of real life situations. It also translates very well into code. And it's especially nice for recognizing and dealing with invalid states. An invalid state is a situation that doesn't make sense in a given domain, right? And I know it all sounds a little bit abstract, so maybe it's best to explain it using an example. So let's suppose that we are building some kind of calendaring system, right? A calendar is, contains events, right? And these are just like simple example. Obviously there's more to events and calendars than this, but again, it's just illustration. So if you look at these examples, we can see that event has a start and an end, and then some sort of description, right? And the start and end can be, we see it can be either a date and time, like hour and minute, where it starts and when it ends. For example, now we are having fun here at this meetup. It starts at 6:30, it will end at 9. At least that's the plan. But if I'm going to watch Simpsons non-stop for 3 days, then I don't care about time, right? I just care about these 3 days. Right, so start and end can be either a date or a date time. So let's see how we can implement it in Rust. And again, like, please don't be offended. I know these are like, the details are terrible and I would never want to implement it like this, but it's just for simplicity, okay? So here's one way. A calendar has events. An event is a vector of event. Well, for non-developers or people not super familiar, vector is basically like a list, right? It's just things, ordered list of things, right? So it's an ordered list of events. So then what is an event, right? An event has a start, an end, and description. Description is a string. String is a text, right? It's, again, like a weird word for just text. Okay, but it has time and time. It's start time and end time. So now the question is, what is the start time and end time? Sorry, what is time? Right? So time is either a date or a date time. Date has year, month, day. Like this is the terrible part I was telling you about, but right? And date time has year, month, day, hour, and minute. Right? And already we see a glimpse of choices and combinations, because event is a combination of start, end, and description, right? Three things combined together, whereas time is either a date or a date time, so this is a choice between two variants, right? And then, of course, date is a combination of these three numbers, and date time is again a combination of three numbers, 5 numbers. Okay, so these were types. Now let's see how we can add things to our calendar. So we have some kind of schedule method, and we add event. We give description, start, and end. Right? Pretty straightforward. Here we are adding another one. This one has also hour and minute, so it's a date time. And here we are adding another one. So after giving the stock, I will have to decompress. First I will sleep until afternoon, and then until Friday I'm going to watch Simpsons. Okay, does it work? Well, not really. So here we have a pretty cryptic error. We can see that I tried to run this thing with cargo run, then it was compiling, but ran into an error, and it says non-exhaustive patterns. And then it's like super cryptic, with like half of the things is punctuation here. And it says not covered, right? Here we can see like a little bit more, the red text I think is more visible. So we see that there are two pairs, right? We have something and something, and this first something in parentheses has date, date time, and then date time, date. And so they are not covered. Okay, that's cool, good to know. So, and of course it gives me the coordinates where the error happened. So it says main RS, line 87. So let's look what's there. Okay, this is line 87 and following. And okay, we say match, and again it's like pretty cryptic, I would say, like end, self, start, end, self, end, and then like date, and there's some dots, and like, right? Okay? I don't know, not pretty. But we can ask the computer to tell us, like to fill the code that is missing. It says that something's not covered, so let's just do it. Okay, now I have this, so there's date and date time, and date time and date. Only the computer tells me to do. So it's for me, I am the one to do this thing, like as a developer. Okay, so what I should do, like what to do? How can I fill this, like deal with this thing? So what, does it even make sense? Like, can the event start at the day and end at the time? Like, it's kind of, I don't know, is it the whole day event? Is it a part? Like, I think it just doesn't make sense. Huh? Okay, so let's try to fix it. And this is one way, this is kind of how I would approach it. Let's say that a calendar has events, but events is a vector of calendar item, right? So this is first change. It's not event anymore, this is now calendar item. And now calendar item is a choice. It's either a regular event or whole day event. The regular event has date, time, and date time, right? And whole day event has date and date. And then this date, time, and date, they are kind of the same as before, only now they are standalone types. They are no longer combined into an enum, now they are completely separate things. Huh? And with this, we cannot mix date and date time, right? Either it's a pair of states in our domain. Let's see how would adding these items look. So now we say schedule, and look, now we have to make choice. You see, now we have to make a choice. Is it a whole day event and then I give 2 days? Or is it a regular event? Well, and now I face the choice. Am I going to watch Simpsons just for some hours or for whole days? Obviously, I chose days, right? And now look at this place where there used to be an error, right? This is the logic that is responsible for displaying this thing. We have some not very technical people. I don't know if you agree with me, but and if you can make sense of it, but I think like now it's much more expressive, right? There are no parentheses, no pairs, no, it's okay, either it's a whole day event or it's a regular event. If it's a whole day event, I just print a whole day event. If it's a regular, it's regular, right? So the logic becomes much simpler and more maintainable. Does it work? Well, yes, it does. Now it beautifully prints my calendar. So to take a bird's eye view, right, to gloss even more on the details, this is what was before. Before event was a combination of time and description. So start time, end time, description, and time was either a date or a date time. Right, this was before. And because there was time and time, here a combination and here a choice, that means like 2 times 2, so we had 4 possible patterns to cover. But 2 of them made no sense. So now we have calendar item that is either a regular event or a whole day event. So here we have choice between 2 things. Regular event is a date time and daytime description, and whole day is day and description. So now we have only 2 main patterns, right? Either a whole day or a regular event. So as we can see, using Rust types, we can remodel our domain into something that makes more sense. Right? This was just a very simple example of a problem, but hopefully it illustrates how you can apply this thinking of choices and combinations into the real life problems that you're facing. And choices in Rust can be represented as enums, whereas combinations can be represented as structs. Or tuples, of course, but kind of similar in this sense. And maybe more theoretically oriented people in the audience recognize that choices are sum types. They correspond to sum types from type theory, and structs or combinations, they are product types. Only I think this, especially if you are talking with businessy types, I think sum types and product types may kind of alienate them, but choices, combinations, I think it's more natural language. So to recap this talk, today I presented choices and combinations as a framework for thinking about business domain. And choices, they correspond to sum types, and in Rust we represent them as enums. Combinations, they correspond to product types, and in Rust they are represented as structs. And most important, this is really the most important point, is that as a developer, I really encourage you to think clearly about domain, which basically boils down to 3 questions. What we are doing, how we are doing it, and why we are doing it. Right? If you find this kind of thing interesting, then please get in touch with me at Software Garden, which is my company of friends. We are doing workshops, paid and free, for developers, designers, and managers, other types, that help them share their knowledge and collaborate better. And if we still have any time, I'll be happy to take your questions or hear your polite thoughts.
Anyone?
All
Okay, so one of the things I was wondering about is you talked about how product types and some types can be used, and that's of course one part of the Rust type system. But we also have lifetimes and borrows. And I know one application where these can be used to model behavior, which is of course the mutex, which has a mutex guard, which limits the availability of the containing type to where it's valid, where it's safe to access it. Have you thought about any ways to use lifetimes and borrowing to encode business modeling into Rust?
Yeah, that was the question I was afraid of. You have a you really have talent to ask difficult questions. No, the question is great. So actually, okay. So first of all, I'm just learning Rust, and my experience right now is that Rust is a ampersand-driven development. So I write code the way. Here's how it works. I write code the way I think it should be. Then the compiler gives me errors, and then I randomly insert parentheses until it works. Sorry, ampersand until it works. And I'm getting really good at this. Like on average, on third trial, I get it to compile. So I'm afraid I'm just not equipped to answer the question. But my observation is compared to functional languages, I think Rust has there's a little bit of mixing of very technical side, especially in type system, with this business domain. And I think this may make it a little more difficult to communicate with other stakeholders, not very technically oriented stakeholders, because like even in type definitions, you have this like, borrowing and lifetimes. So yeah, I'm really curious, and I would like to collaborate with some Rust expert and maybe explore this. Like, maybe we can use it to some advantage, because, as I say, I'm just at the beginning of my journey. So yeah, maybe there's a good way to do it.
It's just an idea, but maybe it could be useful to guarantee database entry validity. I know I abuse a part of Rust sometimes, where I get something from a database, and then I also take a borrow of that database in some kind of guard-like way to ensure that the database isn't changed while I'm using that value. I recognize that bit from your talk. That might be useful, so that's why I asked the question.
Kind of like an atomic operations, like
yeah,
like
sort of enforcing some kind of atomicity on the database level, though. What I'm doing is horrible abusing of a database. So don't do that.
Okay. Well, now you have 2 talks scheduled. Anyone else? Some easy question, please. Like,
what's your background?
I'm a lawyer by education, but I'm better now.
So what you described was constructive logic, right? Have you digged deeper into what are the limitations, like law of excluded middle? Like you can't model certain stuff using this approach.
Yeah, of course, you can't model everything. Yeah, this is just like, it's just scratching the surface. Yeah. There's much more to, especially like type-driven design. It has a lot more tools and also a lot more advantages. The reason to use type-driven design, the advantages that we have there, is mostly, for me, it's that the compiler becomes like a tool for thinking. The compiler helps us think about business domain. It can actually detect or at least hint at contradictions in our understanding of the business domain. So from this very technical tool just to transform code into executable, it becomes a tool to think about the problems.
Have you looked into theorem provers like TLA plus? Or
yeah, if you're an extremist, yeah. The question.
I mean, if you are interested in modeling stuff, you can take a look into the tools that are specially designed for this, and you can express more things into them, like dynamic behaviors of your system, not just its static construction and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I would be careful not to lose part of the contributors, like collaborators in the meantime, right? Because you always have to strike a balance between like expressivity and simplicity. Like I really think that communication is the most important tool to solve problems. So if we are using tools or languages or frameworks that are very specialized, maybe very expert level, we may have difficulty engaging other stakeholders in our activity, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there's that paper, Propositions as Types, that basically says that if you have a good enough type system, you can embed all sorts of logic in the types themselves. Like, come again? No, not at all. At some point, you have to give up, and your compiler will not stop, because then the other stuff from the But you were saying about linear, sort of using borrow checkers. There was this debate. Yeah, lifetime checking. You're switching types is a bit like, there was this discussion at Curion some years ago on how Haskell was switching to using linear types to prove transactionality, and that other kind of logic that talks about a logic that changes over time, so transactions, vis-a-vis as an approach chosen by the Haskell community versus the Rust approach, which is using the borrow checker, which they argued is maybe more low level, more technical, but equivalent, serves the same purpose for the use case of Rust. Yeah, proposition as types. I'll give you the propositions as types. I don't remember the author, but Wadler, Philip Wadler, one of the co-authors of Haskell. Well, yeah, there are several. Actually, there's Papers I Love, which is a Meetup that discusses papers, and apparently it's in search for, they're looking for some, because it evaporated in Amsterdam, so if anybody wants to pick it up, reorganize it, I guess they will be welcome. I can't.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, now you're proposing one way to deal with the problem, and is there any trends that you noticed in the Rust community, or how people often are they also follow the same logic, or you're looking at them doing this other way and then you're thinking yeah, this is how would I solve it, and how I would like the community to kind of solve it. Yeah, my background is very basic. I'm a system engineer to begin with, and I just recently picked up Rust, and I'm just looking at things, and yeah. So I just wanted. So far, I haven't seen a community or the trends or anything that's my background.
Yeah. I will defer to the wisdom of the crowd because I don't have enough exposure in Rust to know what the trends might be. From my personal experience, I'm coming from a small language called Elm, which is, I would describe it like a simplified Haskell. It's a functional programming language with very expressive type system. And one of the enablers, one of the reasons I decided to learn Rust, and now I'm in the process of learning, is this discovery of Rust type system. And so it was kind of a realization for me that maybe what makes language really nice to work with is not so much is it imperative or functional, but a sound and nice type system. So I don't know what the trends might be, but I definitely see that this kind of approach to solving problems is very much possible in Haskell, because we have this type checking compiler that gives pretty good messages if something is wrong. You have exhaustiveness check, and a lot of goodies from functional languages like option types. results or headers. There's a lot of there. I feel like people in Rust community don't talk so much about this theoretical side of things, which I think is good actually, because it makes it more accessible for newcomers. So there's not much talking about monads and functors and stuff like this, but the stuff is there. So I think it's a nice way. As for the trends, anyone feels like commenting? What's the trend?
I think one very small thing to note with Rust development at the moment is most startups and stuff that are working on Rust at the moment aren't particularly consumer facing. So a huge amount of game engines, a huge amount of infrastructure, a huge amount of systems and stuff. And in those situations, you don't necessarily have a whole pile of domain experts who aren't programmers.
Mm-hmm.
So the value you get from building something like a domain language and talking about things like choices and combinations isn't necessarily there when the programmers are the domain experts in a situation like that.
Yeah.
But more and more and more, I'm seeing Rust being used for consumer-facing services, just general SaaS products. And in those situations, then you will have domain experts, and you will need to be able to talk to business and talk to programmers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hopefully the trend is coming.
Please go.
Okay. Oof, am I off the hook now? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, you're doing the last one?
I'm doing the demo of the last two. Yes.
Nice. So you got the fun part.
Well, we'll see if the demo gods bless me or not.
Exactly. Still to be determined.
Yeah.
How's it for you working fully remote when the team is in the office?
It's quite good. So the backend team is mostly me, Evan, and Benno. And Evan used to be fully remote as well. So then 2/3 of the backend team is remote. So then it's quite smooth. But both Evan and Aaron and Benno are very good at keeping me in the loop and doing stuff. So it works fine with asynchronous communication. And mostly we tend to come to the office like every other month-ish or once a quarter. Not waterfall planning as such, but like feature extraction, like sitting down, thinking through features and then deciding, okay, this is the path for the next few months. And then we have a pretty clear list of what we want to do and how we want to do it. So then it's pretty fluid to just work from home.
That's, I think, still like my, I won't say preferred way of working, but I think that's the way to work. Separate the two a little bit and then kind of flexibility that remote allows while still having that contact face-to-face time to work on like all significant problems where you actually can really benefit from having like
social benefits, you know, hanging out.
Yeah,
and
you
stuff.
need both in a way. Yeah. Not the biggest believer in like 1 day, like per week in the office kind of arrangement.
I don't know. I mean, for me, I don't. Like, I've always kind of been like a nerd that just sticks to myself, so I don't have a big need for going to the office, and most of the time I just have a hard time focusing. You know, people walk by, they're talking.
How can let you do this? I don't know if I'm ever gonna be the same. Oh boy, there's gotta be more to this. Just tell me that I'll hold you in my arms again. You do this. I don't know if I'm ever gonna be the same. Oh boy, there's gotta be more to this. Just tell me that I'll hold you in my arms again.
can forget the lyrics in my head. All the things you're keeping to yourself got you sliding away to someone else.
It's taking on my body. You take the pressure off. She said you on my body. I just want the feeling of. It's taking on my body. So keep taking on my body. I didn't want nobody till you took the pressure off. She said you on my body. I just want the feeling of. It's taking on my body. So keep taking on my body. Everyone talking, everyone killing my heart, drinking and loving. Wanna get out of sight, wanna get hypnotized, blinded by every lie. Open my body, says we ain't got far to go. Tell me when the lights go out. It's taking on my body, it's taking on my body, it's taking on my body. Tell me when the lights go out. Tell me when the lights go out. It's taking on my body, it's taking on my body. It's taking on my body. You take the pressure off. She said you on my body. Just want the feeling of. It's taking on my body. So keep taking on my body. I didn't want nobody till you took the pressure off. She said you on my body. Just want the feeling of. It's taking on my body. So keep taking on my body. It's taking on my body. You take the pressure off. She said you on my body. Just want the feeling of. It's taking on my body. So keep taking on my body. Oh, yeah. I want you to be mine again. Does it make no sense? I need just you and I till the end. But it's not for today. Take me to the sun, babe. I will return. Where we find a land where we can restart again. Take me to the sun, babe. I will return. Where we find a land where we can restart again. I just wanna run away, but I'll never go without you. I need to throw it all away. I just wanna be someone new. I want you to be mine again. Does it make no sense?
inside. I see the fire ignite in your eyes. We'll be dancing until morning light. Ooh, believe it. How do you know if you don't even try? To spread your wings, hold the chaos and fly. But you know I'll be with you tonight. This could be my fatal attraction. I'm fearing that I could be lost in a dream. So close yet so far from reality. Yeah, I need to breathe you into me. I know you need it, the passion that brings you to life. Explore a world laced with ecstasy highs. We'll be romancing until morning light. Ooh, come on, release it. That demon you holding so tight. Unlock the door, let them roam, let them fight. I wanna see all the ugly tonight.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so present about that place. Even your emotions had an echo in so much space. Stop making me crazy. Stop making me crazy. Stop making me crazy. Something so pleasant about that pain. You pushed on an ankle, so much space. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy?
Take your deepest blue, trade it in for new. I got all these feelings when I look at you. Ooh, I'm seeing blue skies, sunrise, sun in your eye. I'm not wasting more time. Guess I'm the reason, seasons, you're the rhyme in my heart beats out of time. You do something new to me. You do something new to me. You do something new to me. You do something new to me, and I don't wanna go. Play me one more song. Take a deepest breath, so I won't forget. Try to move on from you, don't know how to. I'm seeing blue skies, sunrise, sun in your eyes. I'm not wasting more time. Guess I'm the reason, seasons, you're the rhyme in my heart beats out of time. You do something new to me. You do something new to me. You do something new to me. You do something new to me, and I don't wanna go. Play me one more song. You do something new to me. You do something.
Ready? You could use Russ's book. Space still works for moving up. Yeah, well, this. Yeah. Let's wait till the last people sit. All right, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see everybody still here. It has been a great turnout this evening. My name is Arend. I'm going to be doing the last presentation together with Simon here in front of me, who will be taking over from me in a little bit. We are both engineers working on FP BindGen, which is a tool that we will be talking about in a little bit. The talk is Fiberplane providers and the path to full stack WASM plugins. I will first be presenting an overview. What are Fiberplane providers? That's going to be the first topic. I'll talk a little bit about how they fit into our product. And then I'll get on to our history with WASM, because even before we started working on these providers, we were already using WASM in our stack, and that heavily influenced also the tool that we built. And then I will talk about FP BindGen itself. FP BindGen is the bindings generator that we use for WASM, and we'll get to that in a bit. And after that, Simon will take over for a handsome demo. So first, what are Fiberplane providers? Well, Mies already showed our product a little bit. Our product is a collaborative notebook.
think like Google Docs or Notion, but more aimed towards developers and SREs. And a critical feature of this focus on DevOps is that we can integrate graphs, tables, logs straight into our notebooks and populate them with data coming from your infrastructure. That raises a problem, because how do you get data securely from somebody's infrastructure into our notebooks? And that is the problem that the providers are aimed to solve. So they connect to an arbitrary data source, regardless of where the data source is, and transform it to something that we can use in our notebooks. Now, a very important part of that is that how do you connect to the data source itself? Because some data sources might be available publicly through the web, some you might need a VPN to access, and yet others might not be directly accessible at all. So depending on the network topology involved, the provider will either run as a plugin in your browser for a direct access data source, or it runs inside of a proxy server that the customer has to install in their network. And that explains why we have to focus on a full stack solution. Unfortunately, if you have to run something both in the browser and on a server, your options are extremely limited. You're roughly down to JavaScript or WASM. Well, I understand that most of you will know what WASM is, but for those that don't, it's basically a sandbox that allows you to run compiled code written in whatever language in a runtime that could be a browser or a server. Now, we're Fiberplane, we are a Rust shop, so for us the WASM option is considerably more attractive. But it's also really important to focus on the security aspect of it, because it is a sandbox. You can expose functionality to it, but that is really the only functionality the code running inside that sandbox can use, which makes it great for plugins, such as providers, that may be developed by third parties also. So that is what providers are and why we wanted, why we used WASM plugins to write them. Now, before, like I mentioned, before we started working on these providers, we were already using WASM. Our front-end stack is basically a React Redux application, but we also, because it's a collaborative notebook, we have some very complex code dealing with operational transformation for conflict resolution. Like multiple people are working in the notebook at the same time, how do you deal with conflicts? That is the OT logic that I mentioned here. And this logic is also running both on the server, where it runs as native Rust code, but also again with WASM in the browser. And our setup for that was pretty typical. We use WASM bindgen, which is kind of like the go-to solution if you want to run Rust code inside of your browser. And it worked, but the TypeScript definitions that come out of it were not really sufficient for our use case. So we also integrated TSRS for having better TypeScript types. And we even contributed a few patches to TSRS, but despite that, the maintenance was never really pleasant, because we got the function definitions coming from WASM bindgen, we got the type definitions coming from TSRS, and we always had to do a bit of manual fiddling to get things working together. And unfortunately, WASM bindgen relies on JSON serialization for passing complex data types back and forth. And for us, that was really becoming a bottleneck in the performance of how we were dealing with this code. So then comes along a use case where we really need full stack WASM plugins. We have all this experience with these tools already. WASM bindgen, well, we already saw the downside, but it simply cannot be used server-side. So that's where we really got our hands dirty. And we developed FP bindgen. FP bindgen is similar to WASM bindgen, but it's really designed from a full stack point of view. So we created two runtimes. It can generate two runtimes for you, one Rust runtime and one TypeScript runtime. And inside those Rust runtimes, you run your code. That is, again, also written in Rust. A lot of those binding generators
They feature like a custom DSL that you define your protocol in. We decided not to do that. We use Rust plus a few macros as our source of truth for the protocol, and from that we generate the bindings both for your guest plugins and for the runtimes. This fits very nicely into our Rust workflow. And not unimportant, rather than JSON serialization, we opted to use MessagePack, which is a little bit more efficient, and also very importantly, it allows us to pass binary blobs efficiently between the two sites, because let's take a provider plus the OT logic, if they have to work efficiently together. You don't want to be serializing, deserializing at every part where you copy the data around. So we are now able to pass binary blobs around, which helps us a lot with the performance. Now, I could talk endlessly to you guys about the nitty-gritty of this stuff, but I think this is the moment where Simon can take over and show you. So I need a moment here to exit this. And then I need to do some screen stuff here so I also can keep track of what is going on. That's that. Right, I see I didn't prepare entirely here, so we're just gonna pretend you didn't see that, or that. We don't know, Benno. So now we need to zoom in. Yeah. So to start off, my name is Simon Rasmussen. As Aaron pointed out, I work together with him on FP BindGen and our provider model that he so eloquently explained. So here I'll give a short demo of how we implement a FP provider and how this interacts with FP BindGen and how simple it is actually to get started with this. So first, I will not that one, I will go here, and I will show how our provider protocol looks. So this is our protocol definition, where we start out with an FP import. So this is basically saying that the WASM module will have access to these imported functions. For example, it should be able to log some messages. It should be able to make some HTTP requests to actually fetch the data. It also needs to have access to the current timestamp, and as well as some random values in case that's needed. And then in our FP export block here, we say that the module must export an invoke function, which takes a request, some configuration data that can be a message pack blob, basically can deserialize however it would like, and then return a provider response. For example, if we look at provider response, we see that it has some error data it can return, or an instant, or series, auto suggestions, various different things that we request the provider to provide in the studio. So I'm not going to invoke this and anger the demo gods, so I'll keep hands off. Rather, I will show how we then use this generated code on the WASM plugin side of things. So I have started out with some code here. Here's the FP export impl of the FP provider, saying that, okay, this invoke function must exist, and it gets bound up to the right auto-generated name that can then be picked up outside the WASM module. There's some fancy macro stuff in there that you can ask into later if you're interested. But for now, I'll show that we can basically just match on our request. And then we have a provider request. So in this case, we'll abuse the log. No, not logs for this. Actually, we want provider request. Auto suggest, like that. And then we will return a provider response, auto suggestions, and Rust Analyzer is very helpful and fills out stuff for us. So here, what we're actually building is a very dumb provider that gives you access to querying what time is it in a time zone. So there is this nice worldtimeapi.org that is not a sponsor, but we'll use their API for tonight to query stuff. And I just defined some random time zones that we want to give out as auto suggestions in the UI. So we can iterate over our time zones. If I can type map. And then we return a suggestion for each of them. And then it has some text. That's our s.toString. And then you have a description. That is just none. Then we take this and we collect it, and then we're pretty much done. So of course we have some other stuff we don't care about for now. We can just mark it as to do, that I have to deal with that later. So based on that, I can go over here. I hope you guys can see this. There's a demo you also didn't see. So yes, as you can see here, we also have our FP tool, which is a CLI tool that can interact with these compiled WASM modules. So if I go here, I go up, I build it. You just have to trust that's in the right WASM build directory. I can basically run that here. So you can see that I pass in a request here that says, oh, please give me an auto suggestion and an empty configuration value. Shall I zoom more perhaps? Like that. And this basically just runs the WASM module you can see here is out to the side, demo, provider, blah, 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 blah. So when I run this, it will take a little bit to compile the WASM, and then it will actually execute, return the data back as a message pack blob, and then we deserialize it again as JavaScript, so it's a little or JSON, so it's a little bit easier to see here. And this can, of course, also interact with the other providers, so you can demo it during your setup or if you're developing your own provider. But naturally, this is not the most useful thing. So let's go ahead and actually implement the interesting part where we go and query stuff. So there we have a provider request again. In this case, we're going to abuse the logs. So if we call this a queue. So what do we have to here? Well, we have to make an HTTP request, which we noted before we can actually import. So we have our FP provider crate that's been generated from the protocol we described before, and we have a make HTTP request function that we can just grab. Make HTTP request, and then we have an HTTP request type that has a URL. We can format it, and we say we have our base URL. And then we have a slash, and then it's API slash query time zones, as far as I remember. And then an actual query, which we then get from our queue here. So this is the input. So this is the query that will actually be passed in there. So that formats the URL, and that is just a string, so that's fine for now. The method is then an HTTP method get. Headers is none, and body is also none. So like that, we can take this, we can await it. To make this happy, we need to wrap it in some blocks. Response. Like that. So based on this, we get a response back from the HTTP, which may or may not fail. So we should actually take this and map the error. So in this case, we don't really care what happens here, but we will return a provider response of an error. If an error is the error something other. Something bad happened. We're sad. Unfortunately. But it happens. Have to make this a string to make our life easier. And with that, we can use our trusty old question operator, I think. And then down here, we know that in the end, we want to return some provider request of our logs so that we can show a nice table in our studio for it, which I'll demo in a bit. So here, we need to return a vec, and then a log record. So for this, the body, I need to check my cheat sheet now, because I don't remember. It's over here. Code is a little bit different. I'm gonna steal this while I'm at it. So as you can see here, the response we get back from the API is just some trivial JSON. So we can use our trusty old friend Certi to actually deserialize this. We define a struct that fits this data. And then again, to switch over. And it was API time zone, not time zones. Important to get right. Hey. I'm not a Mac user, as you can maybe tell. My CEO is trash talking me while I'm doing a live demo. That's a new one. But we'll deal with it. So in order to not bore you too much, I'll copy paste a bit of stuff here. Provider response, logs. Oops. You say that until it errors out on you.
In production.
So have you ever given a live demo with JavaScript? I don't think it's better. Did we do everything correctly here? Logs queued. Back of a log record. We can. Maybe that's easier. Then you don't have to wait. Hey, audience suggestion, don't blame me. All right, so let's compile the wasm module. Then we have another command line up here we can run instead, and I'll zoom in. Again, it's a little bit hard to see. Maybe okay, that just disappeared. Logs. Here. Yeah, so in this case, you can see we will actually send out a query that says, hey, please give me the time and date for Europe/Copenhagen time zone. And if I run it here, oh no, it's decided to compile. Well, I can demo it over here meanwhile. So since Studio is not the most easy thing in the front end, which, I mean, I'm a backend guy, so I don't know what's going on here. I just overwrote our Loki query provider. So I can actually put this in here, Europe/Copenhagen. And then if I execute this, we get some data back here. So we can see at the current time is the exact same time in Denmark currently. And the abbreviation that we got back from the API was CEST. And the demo gods have smitten me. Didn't compile. Oh no.
That's my fault.
Evan cursed me before the demo, as usual.
I told you to pray to the demo.
But I think I can do this here. If I do this, wrong key binding. Oops. And it didn't find the module now? Yeah, okay, I understand why. Because it's not in repo anymore, it's a little bit out from here. Ta-da, we got the same page. So So admittedly not the most smooth live demo in the universe, but as you can see, even under pressure, it's quite easy to develop this. And that's basically thanks to Aaron's brainchild of FP BindGen that basically does all of the binding work. So the CLI tool basically just invokes this generated runtime code that instantiates a Wasmer module, compiles it with the right compiler, sets up the module, the memory, everything's basically handled. You just say, hey, please invoke that function, give it this data, done. And also serializes back and forth for you, handles complex types, asynchronous calls back and forth, everything just works. So yeah, any questions? Yeah, I think I managed to close it.
No, it's not a question. It's a dumb statement. So basically, it's Lambda.
Yeah, AWS Lambda.
Yeah. In a browser.
It's
Distributed.
I see the comparison indeed. Yeah, sorry, is this one on?
No.
Yep. So the statement is it's somewhat comparable to AWS Lambda, and I think indeed there is some similarity. Of course, this is not aimed towards achieving scalability, so the purpose is different, but indeed it's a standalone function that runs inside of a sandbox and that you use for isolating certain logic. Yeah, I think there's a comparison there. Yeah.
Oh no.
Okay, so I haven't really looked into WASM yet, but you mentioned async. So could I write an asynchronous function, basically an asynchronous web server, and compile that with FP BindGen to WASM and then run that? Can I use Tokyo, in other words?
You cannot use Tokyo inside inside those plugins, because I think the main reason for that is because the plugin needs to respond to a request coming from outside, and the async logic is triggered from outside rather than having an event loop that is running internally.
Yeah, similar to Lambda.
Any other questions? That's it.
Yeah, so you're saying that this code is being run on the client's premises, right? So
yeah, customers can indeed.
The customer's premises, and you are the provider of this code. So you're developing these modules that are deployed on customer side, and you basically define what this sandbox can do, right? So
correct.
Are your customers fine with this? Like, because you basically deploy any code to their environment. Like,
you could say it is any code, but to earn our customers' trust, we also open source all this code. So they are free to inspect everything there. And the whole provider SDK, we're in the process of open sourcing that. I don't have a concrete ETA for you, but there will be more on this front.
Yeah, it's basically the whole end-to-end thing. So even the FP BindGen part, the one that generates the code that we run, that is open source, so you can inspect that. And the code it generates is also actually checked in, so you can see that doesn't change. You can compile it yourself. We call it our proxy and provider, and that's what you'll run your infrastructure, which loads WASM modules that you are free to replace and compile those WASM modules yourself, based off the providers that we publicly release.
And how does your deployment model look like? Do you depend on whenever you want, or is this like
it'll basically
scheduled releases or something?
So for the stuff running in the customer's network, they'll basically be responsible for updating it.
Okay.
Yeah, also just more of a statement for utility. I saw that you didn't want to go into the proc macro, right?
I can.
No, but I mean, like, as a budget, a Rust group, I think we should drop the fear for proc macros as well, because when I started doing Rust, I was like, oh no, all this scary proc macro stuff. And then I stripped it down completely to the bare bone. I kicked out Syn, I kicked out all the tools that you use to build a proc macro, and then you realize that it's actually a very simple token tree that you get, and you output a token tree that you give back. And everything you do in between is just up to you, really. You can use Syn, you can use complicated parsers, but you can also just write your own. So when I started with proc macros, I got lost in this, you know, oh no, this is so scary, you know, working with Syn is just, UX. But yeah, so I would just like to make a note that it's really not scary. And compile time reflection is, I think, probably the core strength of Rust, that everyone should just embrace and be able to write these macros. So.
I think we have another talk.
Yeah, sure, but you know.
It's a good point. It's a little bit of expert knowledge, I would say, but it definitely does have to be scary.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be.
So, as you guys know, I'm a big fan of FP binding, really awesome stuff. I was wondering, do you have any tips or maybe possible future solutions to increase the productivity of developers who are going to write plugins? Because writing a WebAssembly plugin and then basically recompiling it and running it inside of some sort of runtime, it poses a unique set of challenges. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on how you could basically improve on this in the future.
I feel like this is a very targeted question about future development, possibly maybe that you've already been let in on. No, so currently our protocol definition is a little bit, shall I say, bare bones in terms of you have to wrap your protocol definition in not a font macro, in an actual declarative macro instead, which outputs some function that keep track of the different types and stuff. And this makes it a little bit hard saying, oh, okay, these functions must be implemented for the protocol to be valid, and some are optional and stuff like that. So one of the sort of, not innovations, but future plans we have in this area is to basically, you define traits instead and say, hey, this is my exported protocol and this is my imported protocol. And then that trait will then just be something that you implement in your WASM module and something that you implement in your provider runtime implementation. So for example, we glossed over it here, but how did this WASM module actually make the HTTP request? Well, that lives in the runtime implementation you have to supply for the provider protocol part of it, yeah. So that's something that's in the works and should make it more clear what's going on, because you'll be implementing the same trait both in your runtime and in your plugin. So you sort of have that red thread throughout the whole thing.
Cool, thanks.
One other thing I could add to that is right now the bindings that we generate are purely aimed towards WASM. But one idea that we're also exploring is to generate one set of bindings that just targets purely native code, so that you can invoke the functions that you define for your plugin, not through WASM, but directly through ordinary Rust, for writing unit tests, so that this becomes easily testable also with your ordinary debugger as well.
Nice.
I have also two questions. First, how big your WASM module is after compilation in general? For example, some simple code, how big WASM binary can be?
I don't have any concrete size examples.
Kilobytes, megabytes?
Yeah, so by default, if you just compile it, debug mode and stuff, the WASM modules are basically huge. There's a few things you can do. So there's a WASM optimizer you can run it through. But some of the biggest size benefits we saw was actually enabling a very new feature of the Rust compiler in the cargo.toml. You can tell it to strip the binaries. This basically removes a lot of the debug symbols and info saying, oh, okay, this function panicked here and there. But because there's no stack traces or anything easily in WASM anyway, there's no loss in actually stripping out the binaries. That gave at least a 50% decrease in size.
Okay.
But I think concretely our production providers are around 100K. Don't pin me to an exact number, but I think that's the order.
150K.
Oh,
and 500K for FiberKit.
Okay. Yeah, that one has a lot of logic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another question. You mentioned you were using Wasm, yeah,
Yes.
for execution. And did you compare with Wasm time? Why did you choose Wasm?
I'll let Aaron answer that.
No particular reason.
Well, frankly, I don't have a complete answer on that one either, because that was kind of made before my time. But basically, the short answer is we have it on our to-do list. We have an issue for it. So if you feel like I would like a Wasm time, then please vote there. We ultimately want to support both. But for ourselves, we use Wasmer, so that's why that one was implemented first for FB Bindgen. All right, if there are no other questions, then I would like to thank you all for coming, and feel free to take another beer or snack, and have a good evening.
Before we continue with beer and food and good talks, let's choose the winners of the raffle. We have 3 prizes, which I'm gonna show. So the first winner is winning Rust in Action, a notebook, Fiberplane notebook, and a t-shirt, so it's plenty. And stickers, the most important part of it. And the second one is actually also winning something nice, Rust for Rustations, a water bottle with a small Fiberplane logo on it. And the third prize is also another water bottle and more stickers. So, I'm gonna look away. So, it's a tiny post-it, well folded. Alex Zolotko. First prize. Then, let me also give you already all of this. And let's specify the size that you might need.
XL.
Yeah, wonderful. This is